Hey everyone, this is Mark Ryan coming at you with another video. Today we have a friend of mine from his channel name is, I always butcher your channel name too. It's Contra Mundo.
Contra Mundum.
Contra Mundum Pro Mundo. There we go.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep. I'm Richard Henry. Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan. Mark Ryan. Yeah, it's Against the World for the Sake of the World is the channel. That's the whole desire. It spins off a bit of Athanasius from the 4th century being Contra Mundum, being against the world, but I kind of added in being against it but for it, in the sense of we were all once in the world, right? Unbelievers and so on, whether we were 5 or 55. And so the world is nutso and crazy, and I think believers, we need to engage a little bit more with it, whether it's a story, from CNN or from Big Eva or something in between. And yeah, I'm a local church pastor here in Kentucky, SBC. I went to Southern Seminary, and I'm not woke, so don't worry.
No,
but,
what's city is Southern Seminary in?
It's in Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville. Okay.
Or Louisville, if you say it like you're from here, but only people from Kentucky say it like that. And I'm not from here, so there you go. But yeah, originally from California, married, got kids, and yeah, God's been good to us. So just trying to use the platform and try and build a community, and at minimum, I think, tell other people that they're not crazy for thinking, all of a sudden this is the new normal or whatever. It's like, no, you're not crazy. Don't worry.
Yeah, after 2020, the world changed. I mean, like crazy, and everyone's wondering, hey, are we the normal ones now, or because everything's just so different nowadays? Yeah. And it'd be so weird, I would think, going from California to Kentucky and to over there. Big change.
Yeah, that's we had lunch after church with somebody on Sunday. To Louisville directly from Southern California, it wasn't too much. Because we shopped at Trader Joe's and Costco, and there's still freeways and normal stuff. We're in a smaller town now, so if we came directly here, it would probably be a much bigger. We've just got a Walmart and one good coffee shop.
Yeah.
And a couple restaurants, but no really nice restaurants at all. And so that would be a definite change. We still go up to Louisville now. It's about an hour and 20 minutes or so, hour and a half. Just for kind of once a month shopping, because you just can't get a lot of stuff that we like to use and eat and everything. So, but yeah, it was a shock in one ways, but in other ways, not so much. We actually met a number of people from Kentucky that were affiliated or from California in Louisville early on, which was kind of a blessing. So I worked at a grocery store, Trader Joe's as well, which is a California chain.
Yeah.
And so several people even who worked there used to live in California as well. So,
yeah. No, I hear you. I live, it's over an hour. It's an hour and a half drive to the nearest Walmart over here. The nearest Walmart's like 90 miles away.
Oh, wow.
So, I'm constantly like, hey, let's get out of town and get to Walmart or get to civilization, really. And, go do some shopping, or especially as Christmas comes. And then going to college, the closest McDonald's is like 40. It was in another state. It was a 40-mile drive. But
40 miles to McDonald's.
40 miles. Yeah, we had one, maybe 2 restaurants in town. If you count the gas station, we had 2 restaurants.
Nice.
Yep. Wow. But that was in North Dakota. But anyways, just to, I guess, steer the conversation today, we're talking about kind of the state of the nation. And I feel like we're kind of on the same page in that, hey, it's pretty pessimistic for the nation right now. And just what we see going on right now. I saw on your channel, you were talking about a statue that got removed, about a week ago or so.
Yeah.
And that'd be a statue of Thomas Jefferson?
Jefferson, yeah. In New York City's City Hall. And, it did make some news. It was on New York Post, at least that's what I was referencing. And it's just, it's been there for almost 200 years, 188 years, 187, something like that. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, some people don't really think it's a big deal, I think. And, like, well, we shouldn't have, second commandment, we shouldn't have idols, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, okay, maybe.
There's that argument that, hey, pictures, that's okay, but statues glorify or worship or something. I've heard that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Puritans and even some of the reformers and stuff had some issues with the second commandment. And I mean, coming out of Roman Catholicism and everything being so iconic, and I've got this and I've got this, and here's this thing, and my beads, and it's like, okay, like we always kind of swing back pendulum. But I don't think the second commandment prohibits having photos or pictures taken or statues or art. I mean, God's a creator God. He has, I mean, we have blue sky, green grass, mountains, valleys. I mean, it's beautiful, and we have a reason why that's beautiful. It's not just arbitrary. But for a statue, maybe it's not beautiful, whatever, but they're doing it because of like he owned slaves and this and that. And like what they're trying to do ultimately is just rewrite history. That's what they're trying to do. And if you erase the foundation, kind of like 1984, that's referenced often, George Orwell and everything, that if you have people detached from their foundation, from their parents, from their grandparents, from their children, this is why no fault divorce and abortion and everything else, it all ties together. You can just break people off into individual units, bipedal carbon units, some atheists call us. And that's it. They just do whatever they want. So we can go serve the state, and, men can do this, women can do this, you can be any gender you want, blah, 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 blah. And so part of that is removing history. And when you remove history, you can supplant it with something else. I mean, even the 1619 Project, that's a whole nother thing.
Oh, yeah.
America's founding. And of course, it was founded on slavery. If it's founded on slavery, it means it's faulty. And if it's faulty, we need to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they want to do. Honestly, I think they want to try and convince enough people in the States to rewrite the Constitution, which takes, I think it's either 2/3 or 3/4 majority to rewrite the Constitution. But
well, and that's crazy, because that's how the Achilles heel, if you want to call it that, of the nation would be just slave owning and things like that, because George Washington, he owned slaves, and did Thomas Jefferson own slaves too?
Yeah,
he did. And so when you have people that want to,
but everybody owned slaves.
Everyone did.
Practically everybody did, and not just in America, but all over the world. And people still own slaves today. I mean, there's supposedly more slaves today than there was at the height of antebellum slavery in the 18th, 19th century. And so that's just so stupid. Like, anyway.
Well, and they see this as like the Achilles heel. If we want to just kind of tear down this nation and replace it with a more authoritarian, more socialistic government, well, that's the Achilles heel, is the slavery issue. And hey, no one's defending slavery. Like that was awful. The type of slavery they had and everything. But people should be able to see what's going on here, in that we're on the same page, in that, hey, like in Venezuela and other nations, when you have a revolution, one of the first things you have to do is tear down statues, get rid of the history. Mao did this. He understood, hey, you got to get rid of the history over there. And he had to do that before he could have the revolution over there. And so it's pretty concerning when we see just every month, it seems like a new statue's coming down. In Montana, we had and Montana's pretty conservative, but we had a Democrat governor actually for about 16 years. And the last one removed a Confederate statue, I think a fountain one, in our capital city and everything. That got some talk, but really not a lot of people were even talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it gets misplaced because people think, oh, you care about this, that guy he was a slave owner, blah, blah, blah. Or, people get frustrated with, or they ignore it completely and think it's not that big of a deal. But again, I heard it was theologians say, I forget who it was. It might have been NT Wright, actually. It was, I don't agree with him on everything, but he's had some good points. And one of which was, people 500 years from now, or even 200 years from now, looking at us and saying, why don't you guys stop using cars? Like, it's just part of our system. We didn't even think about it, right? It's our whole economy is based on carbon, fossil fuels and all the rest, right? and nobody's out there picketing. I mean, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio and Al Gore pretend to, right? Bernie Sanders and AOC, all these clowns, they pretend like they care. They don't care. I mean, they fly to the G whatever summits all over the globe and their yachts and everything else. And they have a huge quote unquote carbon footprint. But if it is as bad as it says it is, 500 years from now, and we're all living in this smoggy wasteland, and everybody has to live indoors, and our great grandchildren are going to look back at us and be like, what were they thinking? Why? I mean, how could they not know? Well, we do know, supposedly, if it's all true, which I doubt it is.
No.
But we're not doing anything about it. And so his comparison was like, that's, especially in the first century, that's how slavery was. Now it's a little bit different than antebellum slavery, but slavery is still slavery in many respects. And it's just part of the air you breathe. You can't change it. It's just, this is what it is. And it was, of course, Christians who started to push against the slave trade, especially in the transatlantic slave trade and so on. So,
well, and that goes into like chronological snobbery where, hey, we think we're better than other generations that went before us. We would never own slaves. We never, praise God, we never would have done A, B, C, and D like those other generations before us. Well, other generations that come after us, they'll have kind of the same attitude. Thank goodness we're not like those folks in 2020 that did all those crazy things in 2020. Yeah.
How could you guys wear masks? How could you not go to church? Or how could you go to church? How could you not wear a mask? I mean,
how could you force 5 through 12-year-olds to get this experimental thing with no, no safety things on it, and there could be trials later on. I think it's wicked what's going on, but those are some of the things that, hey, our generations will go under the microscope there, especially the last 20 years. And even for Christians, hey, you had abortion places like all around your state and in your backyard, so to speak, and you didn't do anything, you didn't say anything about that. I mean, first of all, it's unfair to say that Christians in our day and age haven't spoken into those things. We kind of, a lot of times other generations will kind of broad brush or, generalize things, which people
just like we're doing now. Not you and me, but in general.
Tend to do. Yeah. I mean, everyone does it, right? But hey, there's people today fighting against abortion and everything too, though. But hey, that's one charge against our generation for sure. Then beyond that, we see not just statues, we see names of streets, names of schools they're changing and rewriting names, rewriting history, so to speak. And the more that these things fall, especially George Washington, to me, years and years ago, no one would have thought that George Washington would be canceled. Well, today, it's easy to believe that George Washington would be canceled, I would think, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, and again, it's astounding if you really think about it, especially if you have any remembrance of even in our own lives. I mean, unless you're like 15, or even maybe 20, it's going to be hard to kind of think back past like 10 years ago when you're 10 years old. But so many people are living, and it's like we think back to a time when it wasn't this way. And that's where kind of like, gaslighting and that kind of phrase coming in and pretending like, oh, no, it's always been this way, or no, this has always been like this, and we just haven't said it that way, and so on. And that kind of comes in with, rewriting history in the sense of, oh, the founders were all messed up. But again, that's their whole point, because they want to make them evil. And if they're evil, then we can just do away with the whole thing, right? It's based, this whole experiment, this self-government democracy, it just didn't work out. Let's go with what Venezuela and North Korea, let's go with what they do, because, look at all the human flourishing. Like, it's just, people don't consider, where the skyscraper, why it was built, or who built the first automobile, or the Wright brothers in flying, or Edison, or all of the tech boom with, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Tesla and Virgin Atlantic, and it's just like it's all American. Einstein left Nazi Germany right before everything got crazy, and where did he come? Here, right? And he started to get really popular and famous and doing his thing here, because you can in America, because God-given rights are recognized. And that's what a lot of people just don't see, or Christians don't think, or, well, it's, you're being nationalistic or something like that.
Oh
And
yeah, we'll talk we'll
it's
talk
just
about that,
weird.
because there's some pretty concerning things going on with that. With I guess, to mention it, I guess briefly, like, I've been listening to people like Jamar Tisby talk about Christian nationalism. Well, when they do, they tie that with racism, and basically
Yeah.
with critical race theory. And so Jamar Tisby was talking about, hey, you know, your old school Christians, when they went to church and they said the Pledge of Allegiance, and they had the Christian flag on one side of the stage, then the American flag, and sometimes you pledge allegiance to the Bible. Well, according to Jamar Tisby, that's Christian nationalism. And it's kind of moving into that direction. But beyond that, I'm starting to notice some like supply chain shortages. Have you noticed anything over there? I mean, how's it looking over there?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, there've been definitely, I mean, a lot of people don't seem to be working as much. I mean, most people I know have jobs, I guess. But every place is hiring. And it seems like, every fast food place and this hardware store and this thing and that thing. But then even other places that you wouldn't see, like especially driving up to Louisville, there's several like big, like Amazon and other things are here, but there's other like Keen and GameStop, like these big warehouses just outside of town. And they've all got signs hiring, $15 an hour, up to $18 an hour.
Mhm.
And you're just like, my goodness. Supply chain stuff, I mean, I've seen a little bit here and there. I know Starbucks, which we go there usually like once every 2 months because coffee's not very good anyway. But
Yeah.
sometimes I just want, my wife wants to get a frappuccino or something like that, something
Mhm.
fancy, but inexpensive. But they've been out of like syrups and a few things. I mean, barely first world problems. I mean, let's be real here. But that's because of supply chains, and shipping and stuff has been a little slower for some things. But again, we're obviously, I don't want to sound snobbish, and I don't think that's what you were getting at. But yeah, overall, there really hasn't been that much supply chain issue, really,
Because
that I've seen anyway.
yeah, and I bring that up because, like, in socialism, you get your supply chain shortages. You get people that, hey, they just want food, and you
Oh,
get your bread lines, and people forget how good they had it and everything. And we're starting to notice some supply shortages. I mean, the other day, a friend was grabbing license plates. Well, there's an aluminum shortage, I guess, and
oh,
he's
yeah.
talking
My
about,
parents just had their license plate stolen. My mom just texted me like a couple hours ago.
really? Huh.
Yeah, I don't know if that's related, but they live in Las Vegas, just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, and I mean, it's a really weird place. Not where they live per se, but Las Vegas in general is
Yeah, yeah.
wacky. But
I've never been to that kind of area, California, really the West Coast. Yeah.
yeah,
But even
it's
more
worth a
than that, yeah,
visit.
there's um oil filter shortages over here, kind of.
Really?
Well, it's hard for places to get those, is what it sounds like over here.
Huh.
And so it's just kind of even random things where you go to the grocery store and, hey, growing up, everything used to be stocked, everything used to be full. And now there's certain things you notice where, there's an aisle's kind of empty-ish, or
Yeah.
looking a little sparse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we definitely, I know preppers have been around, TV shows and,
Yeah.
Doomsday Prepper. And a lot of times people will mock at it. And I'm not at all like a hardcore prepper at all.
Uh-huh.
But I think after 2020, if you're not if you're not at least mildly concerned, you know, just in general, whoever's watching this, you're not paying attention. Like even with just toilet paper and a few things. I mean, there was when it was I mean, I went to Costco. We were still living in Louisville at this time. It was March of last year. It's March, like, I don't know, 15th, 18th, something where the stuff is hitting the fan and everybody's just kind of like more like uptight and white knuckled. And like, you can just tell. And I mean, the line was back to the back of Costco. I mean, there was 50, 60, 70 people in line, which normally there's like 5. right, at each register or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I wanted to get a bag of rice, a big thing of rice, because you're like, I don't know, maybe the power's going to go out, because that's one thing we don't even think about. Like, your power goes out, the power grid, you could survive for a few days, but past that, it's really, really scary, because we're so reliant on everything with, an electric stove, your phone, everything, how you cook stuff. And most people are just not prepared.
Well, it gets back to the chronological snobbery. We think we're so advanced, but if we lost power, then we would be, I'd be clueless, a lot of people would be clueless on how
to, I mean, I pretty much would be too. I mean, there's obviously, you want to have flashlights, maybe a solar this or that, or a charger or whatever. But I mean, having more food on hand, dried goods, learning how to garden. I mean, there's other practical things. Having like tangible stuff that you can then trade with as well, I think is, I paid attention a little bit more lately, even having like sugar and salt and stuff that never goes bad. But if worse comes to worse, a month down the road, there's no grocery stores, because supply chains, socialism's running rampant, or just they're turning off power. I mean, they do that in third world countries. Venezuela, for example, they just don't have the power, so they just turn it off. It's like, what are you going to do? How are you going to do your life and clean and work and whatever you're going to do? You can't, and so the grocery store doesn't have power. They're not going to sell you anything, because they can't even swipe your credit card. Your money's probably not worth anything anyway. Like, it's a crazy domino effect. It really is.
And I kind of gauge talk or theories or whatever about by how many people talk about them. And as more and more people start to talk about it, then I give it maybe a little bit more weight, if that makes sense. And now we're seeing more people talk about these things, whereas before 2020, it was just a few people, on the outskirts talking about these things. Well, now it's more mainstream, for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And when we talk about just being ready for stuff, I always think of Eddie Robles with like his chickens, and the eggs and stuff. But in my hometown, there's a fight every year on whether you can even have chickens in town. We can't even have chickens in town over here.
Really? Yeah. In Montana? Really?
Wow. Not in city limits. Out in the county, outside of the town. Of course, I mean, it's a small town, but
yeah. That's funny. Even in Louisville, we could have had up to 5 chickens, which isn't a lot, 5 or 6, and like 2 goats. I think we could have.
Really?
We didn't, and we were like on a 4-lane busy road with like a grocery store just up the road, the McDonald's just there, car dealership, bunch of houses, other apartments. I mean, we weren't like rural at all.
Because Louisville probably has 1 million people in that city.
Yeah, right? I think the metro probably. Yeah, I think so. Something like that. Maybe a little less. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's crazy times, man. I mean, it really is. And I mean, if anything, people should at least ask the questions, like, kind of examine it and push back. And that's kind of why I do my channel. I want to push back on this story or this thing. And I can't cover everything. I wish I could, but not even close. But the Bible has something to say about everything pertaining to life and godliness, right? And so pulling in scripture to bear on whatever situation is, I think is helpful, because even, something like a statue, now it's not about the statue, it's why are they doing this? Now they might give you some reason why they're doing it, but the real reason, I believe, is they want to erase history. So you're much more easily, moved around and kind of just plastic, where you can just be molded however they want. And that goes in with, supply chain and everything else. And
well, the supply chain issues, like, that's not I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's like, oh, the government's incapable of doing stuff. I think it's on purpose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of stuff's coming from China too. And China's doing it on purpose. I was just reading an article about it. It was not directly related, but it was secondary. And it was basically like almost like China. It seemed like, without saying it, was holding the ports hostage. For what reason, I couldn't tell. I didn't read the whole article, because it's digital article. You're just kind of scrolling. But yeah, there's only 2 ports on the West Coast, and they're both in Southern California. And so, I mean, there's supposedly, there are freighters. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of freighters with thousands of train railroad car sized cars, shipping containers full of just stuff. And it's taking forever with either COVID restrictions because of California government, or one guy gets sick at the port, so they got to shut it all down for blah 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 time. And I mean,
and that's part of it is with the 2 weeks quarantine, the 10 days quarantine. When COVID first struck, and it was, hey, if you have any symptom under the sun, you got to self quarantine for 2 weeks. Well, all you have to do is be alive.
I know you coughed. It's like
quarantine for 2 weeks. Yeah, I have a sore throat. I mean, anything, and then you get your free money, and you just sit and. When I see stuff like that, I'm just extremely like, yeah, this is done on purpose. Yeah. Okay. And then even just talking about it and saying that on YouTube, can you do that? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll find out.
I guess. Yep. Then the condition of America's big cities. One thing I've always noticed is that, hey, if you look at our top 25 cities or so in America, well, most of them are run by Democrats. Probably the top 23, top 20 for sure. But I think it's more like top 22 or so biggest cities in America. They're all run by Democrats. Why do you think it is that bigger cities, which, hey, I think they're deteriorating now? New York City, I mean, you need papers to eat a hamburger by the Statue of Liberty. I mean, things are kind of deteriorating over there pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah.
But why do you think it is that the bigger a city gets, the more liberal it is, the more they embrace kind of anti-biblical values too, even?
Yeah. I mean, to one degree, I mean, Cain goes off and builds the city right after he kills Abel. Now, were there other brothers and sisters at that point? There's kind of debate on that, with all the way back to Adam and Eve. But we know that they had other sons and daughters, right? Of course, they had Seth. He was kind of the new line, et cetera, et cetera. But Cain went off and did his own thing. And kind of from then on, cities have always been, to one degree or another, kind of cesspools of not the best stuff, right? At minimum, they've just been it's not really that great. And at worst, they've been, wicked cesspools of immorality. I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? We have Tyre and Sidon, we have Rome, we have Corinth, on and on and on. And that's just ancient stuff. I think more than that, and just by experience, which isn't a lot, I mean, I don't want to say like I've had a ton of experience, but some, is that people, and this is really striking Big Eva really, really hard. And it's self-inflicted. But people, when you're with other nationalities, other men and women, there's only two, right? I'm gonna get canceled for saying that. No, I don't care. But really, there's only two. People kind of like, there's this low. They lower the lowest common denominator, as it were, and so people are together and they think this, and they're like, yeah, I mean, Trump did some pretty good stuff, blah 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 blah. He was a little stupid and probably should have got off Twitter, but I mean, look at his policies, look at this, look gas prices, look at how we had international relations, but the media feeds this lie because they're total leftists and they want a one thought state.
It's state media now, yeah.
It is, but that's the common. The media has still tricked a lot of people to think that they're unbiased, which they've not been unbiased for a long, long time. Fox, CNN, whatever. But people see that, and it's kind of in the back of their mind, and they think, well, yeah, but they say Trump's a racist. And if I say I like Trump, even if he is a racist, which, like, if you have no morals because you're an atheist, because you are a leftist Democrat or something, you don't have a reason to say racism's wrong, because you don't have a moral authority, you don't have a moral lawgiver, there is no God.
Well,
whatever, that's what they think, right?
With the left, with your leftists, even your progressive Christians, hey, Phil Vischer or something like that, would they would say, hey, Trump's a racist? Do you think they would go even further and say, hey, Trump is a Christian nationalist? You think that they would go,
I don't know,
that far too?
I don't know. I mean, Trump definitely is, he's definitely different than he was 20, 30 years ago. And I noticed that with, just how his attitude, again, I don't know him, I've never met him, probably never will, but you can just tell like who he hangs out with and the certain things he said and has said. And a lot of people thought, oh, it's just an act in 2016. But then you have 4 years of actual consistency, actually doing what he's supposed to be doing, because he said he's going to do all these things, and well, he did most of these things. And you're like, oh. And so there's no excuse in 2020, and yet people still want to be like, well, he's still, well, and they kind of fill in the blank. Or we're still Christians who think, they act like there's no forgiveness, as if maybe this guy is a believer. It's like, well, he posed with the guy from Playboy, and he posed in this, and he did that thing, and he's been married 3 times. And it's like, I mean, yeah, but weren't you a wicked sinner beforehand? Again, I'm not saying Donald Trump's a born again evangelical, lover of Christ. But what I am saying is people were acting like there's no redemption, there's no forgiveness, there's no possibility, because they've already had this in their mind that he's a racist, he's a xenophobe, he's a homophobe, he's a this, he's a this, he's a this. And it's like, this doesn't compute, especially with Christians who are supposedly, of the truth and knowing the truth and being set free from the bondage of this world. Then there should be a difference of, oh, I understand this. Let's give this guy the benefit of the doubt. Let's look at this from a impartial perspective.
Well, what I would say is
it's weird.
Like Marxism came out of the closet in 2020, 2019. Just came out of the closet before, socialism has really infected our colleges and everything. But under Marxism, you break everyone into oppressor or the oppressed. And that's what's being done now, especially as 2020 on. Well, hey, Trump, he's the biggest oppressor ever. And you almost for Marxism to thrive and socialism to thrive, you have to find that one person that is worse than the devil himself. And for them, that was Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And hey, did Donald Trump have flaws? Yeah, he has flaws. If you're a person, you got flaws. Every person has
all of a sudden it falls short of the glory of God, right?
Yep. But the media really misses that one person they can paint. Hey, they're worse than the devil. Look what they're doing. They miss that because right now it's cut them. Joe Biden's approval rating, it's like 38 right now. It's in the gutter. Kamala's is even worse. CNN's ratings they've tanked, and no one's watching because, hey, they need that person, Trump, really, to drive ratings up. They need that enemy to just strike fear into everyone, saying, hey, this guy's out to be a racist and take everyone's rights away and do X, Y, and Z. They don't have that right now. And I'm sure they kind of miss it. They'll, once 2022, 2023 comes and a new Republican runs for office, they'll have that all over again. Hey, DeSantis, he's worse than Trump. And they'll have that kind of oppressor that they can tar and feather all over again and get everyone up in arms all over.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, and I think, again, back to the city analogy, I think a lot of it is just because the leftist ideal, because you really can't even call them liberals, because liberal is actually like the liberal arts or libertarian, which is where that actually comes from. Calling a leftist who basically, soft pedals communism, they're not liberal at all. They want a one world or one thought. One world, really. They would probably prefer that too, but they don't want any dissent. They don't want any disagreement. There isn't this culture of iron sharpening iron. There isn't any sort of like, disagreement of, well, this, or, well, let's figure out the best thing for society. Now they use all the lingo as if climate change and all this other stuff, it's for society, it's for your good. This safety measure of masks and blah blah blah, these are all for your good. This is for your safety. You don't want to kill grandma, blah blah blah. But they don't really want that. They don't want people to think. That's what they don't want. Or they don't want people to think, right? They want one unit of thought. And I think when people come into a city, the cities, especially bigger cities, have kind of a personality of their own, right? And there's so much more stuff there. And the leftist ideal appeals to sin. I mean, I used to think this even as an unbeliever in my early 20s, that, I wouldn't even call myself, I wasn't a liberal then. I was a middle of the road. I used to call myself a Republicrat, where it was like, kind of Democrat, kind of Republican.
Yeah.
And, as a conservative, I would just call myself a rhino probably, but now, call myself then. But there's just stuff that we like. We have the flesh, right? So we see pornography and drugs and alcohol and abuse of this and that, and it is this oppressor oppressed, but nobody calls it that. They redefine all the words, and it's not new. I mean, it's been around for decades and decades. Calling contraception or abortion and all this other stuff a right. Oh, it's a freedom. It's liberating. When all it really is, it's actually enslaving, right? Because you're enslaved to your passions, which of course the scripture says full well not to be, right? Don't walk by the flesh, but put on the spirit, put on the full armor of God. And so I think being in the city, it rubs off. And even if you're a strong believer in a strong community, and that's why you need a really good church and a good, ministries and good outreach and good things in cities. And I think that's actually why, and I'm seeing this a little bit more with even my experience in more rural, pastoring a rural church, is people are rural. They're kind of like, I'm good. I'll see you around. I'll come to church when I come to church, whatever. But in the city, which of course I thought it'd be the opposite. I thought people in rural would want to be in church even more, but they want it even less because I think they're more independent and they're like, I'm hands off. Whereas in the city, you've been trashed each and every day, 5 days a week, walking around, doing whatever, seeing the billboards, hearing about this, rainbow flags, whatever, bumper stickers, you name it. You need the rejuvenation of being with God's people. And I think actually being in a city, you're going to see stronger believers and a stronger community because we need each other that much more.
Okay. There'd be pros and cons for sure. I could think of like John MacArthur's church and what they're going through or what they went through and how that would strengthen someone's faith for sure.
For sure.
And yet if we were to look at a map of the United States and how just the 50 states vote, your cities with tons of people almost unanimously vote Democrat, right? But then your rural areas, hardly anyone, which takes up a lot more land mass, almost unanimously vote. If you look the color, where it's majority Republican, majority Democrat, well, almost unanimously that's Republican. And so I find it interesting why, hey, it's like that, where hey, you got a city with 1 million folks, Democrat. You have rural areas where no one lives for miles and miles, Republican. And I tend to think if you put a lot of people in one area, a lot of sinners in one area, then you concentrate that in just one area, and people excuse sin more and all that too.
Yeah, I mean, bad company corrupts good morals, right? And so in the sense that we are called to be salt and light, but it's easier to be salt and light for me now than in one sense than it is even was in Louisville in one sense, because first of all, I'm seeing way more people more regularly in a town, or in Los Angeles where I lived before that. I'm seeing say 1,000 people or 5,000 people in a week, at the grocery store, quick conversation, somebody at Starbucks, whatever, versus now I might see 50 or 100 or whatever, depending on how I see people at church and, and then other places around. So they're the same types of people, because if you have this familial connection, you're going to be a little bit more responsible. And that's, I think the second thing that's more prevalent is you can disappear in a city. And so you can go live your life. You can go rob a liquor store. You can go knock off a car, do whatever, break a window.
There's
and it's really going to be hard for that to happen.
Yeah, the accountability.
So there's no accountability. Precisely.
Yeah, whereas if everyone knows your name, which I live in rural Montana, hey, everyone knows your name. Everyone knows, your family and that kind of thing. It does keep people more accountable for sure. I can see that part.
Yeah. So that's really, I think, an additional part to why cities become, cesspools as they are. Now, the voting, I mean, we can, we're not going to debate it.
But as far as voting,
the voting isn't, voter fraud isn't new. I know 2020, let's be real here, the most popular president, now we have Let's Go Brandon all over the place and everything else. And it's like, really 11 months later, 10 months later, and now everybody hates him. I don't think so. It's kind of like the guilty kid, the 5-year-old who's got crumbs on his face and is acting like, he didn't steal a cookie or eat all the cookies. And it's like, but he's saying he didn't. It's like, well, why are you acting like that? Because your words aren't matching your actions here, 5-year-old. And with the media and the legacy media especially, acting like there's nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here. And you're like, but it seems like there's something to see here. But voting fraud's not new. I mean,
we're on the same page in that, hey, when you have a country fall to socialism, they don't have fair elections. Russia will have elections, but Putin will get all the vote because you can't vote against them. If you know what's good for you, you can't vote against them, right?
Right.
If it's Venezuela, North Korea, stuff like that, they'll have elections. They're not fair elections, and that's why it's concerning that hey, our elections are being called into question right now. Hey, are they free? Are they fair? Because if America does fall to socialism, you can just guarantee it. The elections will not be free and fair. No. They will be corrupt for sure. And it is concerning where, hey, more and more people are talking about our elections, especially with the mail-in voting. I would think that the mail-in voting would just open the floodgates to corruption, whether it's harvesting ballots and stuff. Because people talk about it. You can have in your rural areas that, hey, they vote more conservative, right? You're mailing out ballots to a house here, then there's one a mile away or 5 miles away, especially in Montana. Whereas in your big cities, you could be mailing ballots, 1,000 ballots to the same apartment building or, the same neighborhood. Yeah. And then, hey, a Democrat comes to basically, hey, have you voted, and make sure all those ballots get counted and everything.
Yeah, I've honestly not thought my vote mattered for pretty much the whole time I've been voting, and that's since like 2004. And so it's just like, not to say we shouldn't care, and not to say we shouldn't try and support audits, especially if there's weird stuff going on and everything else, or people are acting like there's weird stuff going on, but there isn't supposedly weird stuff going on. But I mean, again, voter fraud, I forget what I was reading, it was a while ago. But it was mentioned like 80 years ago. Like it was, I think it was, I can't remember which president it was, but I mean, they were concerned about it then, like during and before World War II. And so it's not new, right? And anyway, but yeah, I mean, you're right. In actual straight out socialist, Cuba, places like that, communist type countries, they don't have fair elections at all. They might have an election, they might have some sort of song and dance and make people feel like it's legit.
And I don't even know that they feel like it's legit. It's a lie that they're forced to repeat. Hey, the elections are fair, but they all know that they're not fair. Yeah. And that there's so much corruption going on, but you're forced to repeat the lie. And I feel like we're kind of having to do that in America. You have to repeat the lie. And if you don't repeat the lie, then, well, you're actually the one that's not for free and fair elections. That's how it's going right now, which is
you can't question it. It's that's
the thing too. You're not allowed to even question the election in authoritarian nations like that. And now we're seeing glimpses of that here, at least, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to that. They don't want dissent. They don't want any dissenting opinion to say, I'm not really sure about that, because they don't like our God-given freedom of thinking, of being a rational, though sinful, but still having the capacities, because we are still made in God's image, though marred by sin. We still have the ability to reason and have common sense and build. And I mean, that's why America has been such a prosperous, innovative, everything type nation for the last 200 some odd years, and just the West in general, is because of Christian principles of knowing there's a God, that there is a creator, the laws are consistent, gravity does this is how physics operates, we can operate and do these certain things within, and we can invent computers and cars and the light bulb and everything else. In an atheistic worldview, you in a universe like that there is no governor, there is no creator. Who knows if gravity will be consistent tomorrow? Who knows if the sun will come up tomorrow? We all know it will, because we have, that innate God-given, he placed the knowledge of himself in everybody, but we suppress the truth and unrighteousness, right? And so, yeah, I mean,
well, and when you have cultural Christianity dying, which, hey, cultural Christianity's dead in the United States, I think. It probably died with Obergefell decision, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it was on life support before that. In my opinion, it was doing its dying breath before that. But when cultural Christianity dies, something has to replace it. And we're seeing what's replacing cultural Christianity, and give it some time, it won't be good. People will miss the days where cultural Christianity kind of ruled the day. They'll be saying, hey, remember back back in the good old days. Because when people reject biblical principles, then you're inviting calamity and just heartache, destruction, ruin, God's judgment, really. And so I think we're seeing it even now, right now, poured out today, but even more in the future, as all the time we're seeing more, just more things, more shocking things that, hey, 20 years ago, no one would be talking about the things that we're talking about today, some of the stories with polygamy going like mainstream and things like that.
I thought it would actually happen sooner, honestly.
Yeah.
With I mean, even in 2008 was Prop 8. California has propositions, which of course I thought every state did when I live in California, but that's only a few states actually do, where they can vote on, you get a certain number of signatures and you put it to the voters. And Prop 8 was to define marriage. So you vote yes on it, was to define marriage between a man and a woman, vote no. And it still passed at 52%. And there was some sort of referendum even in 2000 that also passed at like 68 or 66% of saying marriage between a man and a woman. And so that was part of Obergefell being folded in there. But what was I saying? The Prop 8 was just, I was thinking even then that, well, they're gonna push for polygamy. And I mean, I don't know, it's what, 15 years later, or 12 years later. And
there was a story about that. Yeah. In the same area where Obergefell came, there's like a polygamy kind of case going on or something. I should look into that more.
I mean, it's out there. I mean, in New England, I've seen a few random videos of this couple. They're a throuple, or there's the sister wives fake show with
it's
Mormons.
going on in the entertainment. You kind of have to bring it into entertainment, bring it into culture.
Yeah, I mean, they did that 40 years ago with the LGBT stuff.
Mm-hmm. You remove the shock value, and now we're hearing about minority attracted persons, and that's even kind of going removing the shock value behind that too, to a degree.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I think James White brought it up at some point, maybe a couple years ago, but there's like some association of called the North American Association of Man Boy Love or something like that.
And it's they've been around for a while. Yeah.
It's like grown dudes like you and me, but are like hanging out with like 12-year-old boys in like a romantic way. Mm-hmm. It's just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, it's just insane. Like, it's just insane. And that's not new. It'll hit the mainstream at some point, and some people will be like, aghast and falling out of their chair. And it's like, well, have you not been paying attention? Like, what's going on here? But I don't know. That's why conversations like this are good, and I hope helpful, because we need to pay attention, and we need to implore other people to pay attention too. You don't need to pay attention to everything. Some people have a talent to see that and discern and kind of weigh everything, but you still got to at least see the big picture stuff. And if you don't, you're just going to get caught blindsided. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, and I think the last thing I kind of have on the list to talk about is like Christian nationalism. I was saying Michael Flynn, he was in the news a while ago, saying, hey, America needs to be one nation under God. Hey, that's not controversial, right? But then he says we need one religion under God as well. And so you had a lot of people kind of freaking out over that, especially progressive Christians and people saying, hey, Michael Flynn, he's a Christian nationalist. And that was going in the media. The Young Turks were talking about it. Phil Vischer, a lot of people were talking about. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, in one sense, I would love that as a believer, and you probably would too, right? And that's where, in one sense, looking at even eschatology in a post-millennial type of eschatology of things are getting progressively better, and people can make arguments on both sides whether they are or not based on how we were 5,000 years ago or 500 years ago or whatever. But I'm very cautious, not only because as much as some people might want to say, John Calvin's Geneva was a paradise, it wasn't. It was good in a lot of respects, but it wasn't a paradise. And just like America is good in a lot of ways, but it's not a paradise. But even like the Church of England, I mean, I think that's where we see such radical secularism in Europe is because of a state church. And we saw that even in state churches, whether they were Roman Catholic or Presbyterian or whatever, in the colonies before the founding and Declaration of Independence and all that. I mean, that's why Providence, Rhode Island in particular, was formed, is because there were Baptists being persecuted, again, prior to the Declaration. They were being persecuted by Roman Catholics and others, because they're baptizing believers, they're not baptizing babies. And so they start Rhode Island, but they had prostitutes and hoodlums and all sorts of other stuff come there too. And so it's as much as I want to be we have to have one religion, first of all, it just doesn't work practically at all, because people are sinners. You can't force somebody to believe. Now, I think we should have much higher standards, and we still enforce murder in certain situations.
Well, and part of it would be we
can't do all.
Whose laws do we live by? If you're a Christian, we have to say, hey, nations should live by the law of God. And that's to me, that's pretty obvious. And so when you, but then I think in the future, if you say something like that, well, then, hey, you are a Christian nationalist and things like that. I'm trying to gather my train of thoughts on this, but my understanding is that just a good worldview of what's happened between the church and the state is originally there was kind of a clear distinction. But when Constantine converted to Christianity, he said, oh, hey, by the way, the church is subject to the state. The state is an authority. I'm an authority over the church. And it was that way for a long time until finally popes came along and they said, oh, no, you got it all wrong. Actually, it's the exact opposite of that. The church is an authority. The church is the head of the state. Whereas a biblical worldview would say, no, there's a clear separation between church and state. The state is not head of the church. The church is not head of the state and authority over it. Like Jesus Christ is head of the church. And I would argue, hey, Jesus Christ is head of the state as well in the ultimate sense.
Yeah, and again, I completely agree, and I wrestle with that in the sense of, I mean, my eschatology's changed a little bit over the last few years, well, quite a bit over the last few years, and that's one of the things that's still kind of a head scratcher for me, because I'll read Gary DeMar, who I've actually had on my channel a couple times.
I saw that one, yeah.
He's great, or Doug Wilson, or some of these other guys, Greg Bonson, and it's yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, but practically, how is that supposed to work? How are we because I feel like it goes too much you have to come to church with me. And it's I don't want somebody in my church who doesn't want to be there, right? I don't want somebody who's lip syncing the songs or whatever, because now I'm ahead over them as a sinner, because I'm telling them, you need to do this because God is God. And it's yeah, God's God, and he doesn't need us at all. Well, if nobody comes to faith in Christ, he's not changed at all, right? And so in one sense, we should have laws, and they should be based, on the Ten Commandments, on God's law in general. But I don't know, I've not found a good, it's still real rough in my mind as far as what that really looks like. A nation, one nation under God, one nation, one religion.
Well,
Christ is head of the United States. And it's like, I mean, he is, but like these people don't care about that. And so like, now what are we supposed to do? I guess that's always my question. Like, now what? You know, like, I don't know.
Well, and just talking about Christian nationalism, it can be pretty confusing in that it's kind of a postmodern word. It has no real definition to it. If you ask 100 different people, hey, what's Christian nationalism? You'll get 100 different definitions.
Yeah.
And so it's postmodern. Really, I think it's a Marxist word because, hey, this other group that we don't like, well, they're Christian nationalists. It's Marxist in that way. It breaks people into groups and all that.
Yeah. Being a nationalist is not seen as a good thing. But then you have to flip it and say, so you're an internationalist, which that's what a lot of people want. That's why they want open borders. That's why they want all this other stuff, because people are more easily controlled. And again, they think they are. They're not.
That's how they link it into the CRT stuff, into the racism stuff, the white privilege stuff. Well, you white Christian nationalists, you don't want immigrants here. That's because you're white Christian nationalists. You don't want people from the Middle East, like Muslims or whatever, to come, like with Trump and the refugee situation and stuff. Well, that's because you're a Christian nationalist. You're trying to protect your Christian privilege. And so even things like with the Equality Act, as people try to get that passed, I think in the future, hey, if you oppose the Equality Act, well, why? Well, that's because you are a Christian nationalist. I don't think that. Do you think that's crazy or?
I mean, what about it? What's crazy?
Well, in that, hey, in the future, if folks oppose the Equality Act, maybe a senator or something, well, they're a Christian nationalist or.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, it's in one sense, it's kind of the new, racism, like it's just name calling. But again, that's one thing that is good, and I would encourage everyone listening, is that when somebody's just calling names, they don't have an argument. They're already gone. There's not actual thing. Now that doesn't mean they don't have an effect, doesn't mean names don't hurt or anything like that. The whole sticks and stones thing is bogus. But when somebody they just call names like, oh, you're a racist, you're a nationalist. It's like, okay, like it doesn't, it needs to not affect you, just the water off the duck's back and just move on with, all right, now what's your real argument, person? Because they want to just constantly, shout or say, prove it or this or that, whether you're talking to a leftist or an atheist or just some person who doesn't like the United States. Most of the time they don't have any argument for the alternative, right? Like, well, Donald Trump is this. I mean, this was my problem with a lot of believers, Christians and professing Christians in 2016 and 2020. It's like, well, Donald Trump, he's just this and he's just, then it's like, okay, so I'm sorry, but is there somebody else running besides Hillary that's worth like our time, or somebody else besides Biden? Because these clowns are just as wicked, hanging out with, the Jeffrey Epsteins, doing just as much wicked, if not worse. We just don't know about it. But I mean, you watch, a couple of conspiracy theory videos on YouTube, and probably half of it's true. If half of it's, even if 10% of it's true, it's more than enough for us to be like, whoa, I can't vote for this idiot either. Like, but people were so like, Christianity Today writing about Trump and this and that. And I think it was Wilson was like, well, I look forward to the article, at the beginning of Biden's presidency, of exposing all of his flaws and all of his things and how he's not, I mean, he's a good Roman Catholic, the Pope says. It's like, is he really? Molesting women and murdering babies? Like, yeah, that's
the media just blasted Trump for a long time over the cages, if you want to call it that. Well, that skyrocketed under Biden, and what do you get out of the media? Crickets out of the state media, like nothing. And the same progressive Christians who are blasting Trump, crickets over Biden and the cages. It's just a little shocking there. But part of why I bring up Christian nationalism is that years and years ago, I don't know if you remember this, Bernie Sanders was kind of interrogating this guy. I think he was coming up for like a judge or a prominent position. Well, in the past, he said that, hey, those who don't worship God, he was talking about Islam and Muslim. Hey, well, they will not go to heaven. They shall not inherit eternal life. And Bernie Sanders kind of really went at him saying, hey, if you believe these things, that if you do not believe upon Jesus Christ, then you're going to hell. You're not fit to be a politician in the United States. And so I think that's the direction things are going, because in socialist nations and authoritarian nations, you don't have Christians in the government.
Most of the time, yeah. No, you don't.
You don't. It's it's kind of unheard of. Generally speaking, I mean, in China, I can't really name any officials over there, but that's just one of the traits of a authoritarian nation. You don't have Christians in high place, and if you do, they're they're not outspoken for sure. And that's why, hey, Mike Pence, hey, he's an outspoken like evangelical. He's an evangelical Christian. It's nice seeing some Christians, at least in government still today, but over time, I think we'll be seeing that removed, and that, hey, you believe that Jesus Christ is the only way and all the roads go to destruction. Well, hey, you're a Christian nationalist. You believe that Jesus Christ is the only hope for the nation. Well, you are a Christian nationalist. That's the way that I think it's going, and it intersects with critical race theory. And I wish that YouTubers, that AD or whoever, some folks would start talking about that aspect of it, because over time, I think the conversation will shift from racism, because the racism conversation, it seemed like one day you woke up after the George Floyd protests and riots, and everyone was talking about racism, like everyone was. And one day, I think just like that, a switch will flip and it'll be over something else just as intense, if that makes sense. And it'll come kind of out of the blue, and hopefully doesn't take us by shock.
Yeah, no, I'm sure so. I mean, it really, has kind of come on by storm, but most of it is artificial, because let's be real here. I mean, you or me, and obviously we're more red states. And I did see some stuff though in Louisville that's very blue. I mean, that's where Breonna Taylor lived. And there were riots and this and that, but even still, I didn't see anything personally. Now, I was, for the first time, like mildly fearful, because I was actually selling phones for Verizon, thinking people would come in and loot and do whatever, which they didn't, thankfully. But there were protests and marches, and they did close down the downtown area a few times. And the AG, the Attorney General, was actually David Cameron, who's a Republican, but is Black, more melanated, right? As my friend Jason Winokur says, melanated plus. But he didn't say the right thing. He didn't say the right quote unquote words, even though those words were after an investigation of justice, just like we saw this with Rittenhouse and other things. People don't care about the facts. Again, we're to a point where people don't, the whole facts don't care about your feelings. Yeah, that's true. But these clowns don't care about the facts. They just don't. Well, they want a result. That's what they want.
That's what Marxism does. You have your two groups, and Kyle Rittenhouse, he's in the other group. And so we don't care about whatever justice is, whatever our group says it is, basically. And whereas biblical justice, it's weird seeing folks or groups, I should say, groups like the Gospel Coalition, who they went down the social justice path, saying we really care about justice. Well, no, you don't, because what about the Kyle Rittenhouse decision is the obvious case of why you actually do not care about justice. But we're going down a tangent there.
No, it's true. Yeah. It's funny too, and I won't go there, but I will say, regarding just a moment ago with Christians in government, And this is why history, knowing our Bibles in general, and just history in particular as well, is so important, because we can take refuge in both in, what happened 300 years ago, 800 years ago, whatever, reading biographies, understanding this debate, why was the Nicene Creed written, or why was the Athanasian Creed written, or whatever. But even looking at the scripture and going back even further, well, what was Daniel? I mean, he was like vice president basically, and he was worshiping Yahweh. Well, why was he there? Well, because he was great. he was a good guy with good moral character who could be trusted. Because the thing is, this reaches to a certain point where, a leftist regime eventually pops. Now, it might take decades and decades, but it eventually pops, because everybody's backstabbing and lying and deceiving and stealing. Nobody can be trusted. They'll eat their own. Exactly. So if, as men and women, followers of Christ, and I presume that's what most people are watching, then all the more be a good husband, be a good worker, be a good citizen, tell the truth, show up on time, pick up that scrap of litter, hold the door for the person, smile, don't be a jerk even when somebody else is a jerk, turn the other cheek, that whole thing. People will actually be like, yeah, this guy's great. I mean, there was a ton of seminary guys at Trader Joe's where I worked there, and there were a handful of people. I mean, I work with I guess it was just one trans guy and a couple homosexuals, and there was not anything like, we were almost bulletproof, to use the word, in the sense of like, we were some of the best workers who worked there. Right. But it's also bad when you're not, right? When you're lazy, or you show up late, or you're not trustworthy, then it's like double condemnation from the world. Like, yeah, that lazy Christian, I knew he's just a hypocrite, so that's why we have to keep, what is it? The verse of keep watch on our life and ministry, I think it is. So yeah, I mean, we can take heart, at least knowing that somebody like Daniel stood firm in his convictions. I mean, he even thrown in the lion's den, right? And he doesn't die, and I'm trusting God and not men. Anyway, there's definitely hope. There's always hope. So
yeah. Well, I think that's a list of stuff I had kind of jotted down, actually a bunch of random stuff, to be honest.
No, it's good.
Kind of tied in more with, I guess, socialism and kind of the direction that we see the nation going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the time, man. I appreciate having me on. Thank you so much. It was definitely a lot of fun. I love talking this stuff out, and getting one more conversation, one more person or two or three thinking about important issues. And if you disagree, or at least question, right? Have dissent. Don't just go with the narrative. I mean, anyway.
Well, yeah, tomorrow I talk with AD. Anything I should ask AD, or talk to him about?
Chastise him on his tone. No, just kidding. People always say like, "Oh, your tone." I don't know. I'd be curious with what you brought up with CRT, and just the connections that it has in other areas, besides just the general like kind of racism stuff.
But if you watched AD's video today, I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but
I've not watched it today. No,
you haven't. It showed some new like robot soldiers with artificial intelligence, and it looks like they're doing parkour or something, basically. But it's AD saying, hey, that looks really creepy, like really disturbing, because we're getting into the era of kind of like super AI, super intelligence, artificial intelligence, and they could teach these robots to do just crazy things, which, hey, I want to talk to him about that, because to me that seems pretty interesting.
I mean, we've all seen the movies, right? I mean, even as Christians, right? I mean, we've seen Terminator. I've seen Terminator. I've seen The Matrix. Like, it doesn't go well, right? Like, come on, people.
Yeah.
Like,
I joke about. I think they're gonna go around and hey, have you had your vaccine? And if you haven't had your vaccine, they'll have lie detectors on those robots or something, right? To see if you're lying or not. And but it's just crazy to think about new times, new challenges that other generations of Christianity haven't had to wrestle through in the same exact way as we do, for sure. But we'll do this again sometime. But make sure that you go check out Richard's channel. Again, I don't want to butcher it again. I always have to think when I go to say your channel's name. Contra Mundum Pro Mundo. There we go.
That's right. Yes.
I'll put a link in the description. And with that, we'll see you in the next video.
All right, man. Take care.